Every life has a soundtrack. Join me as we invite guests to share their journey through music, one song at a time. 10 moments, 10 memories. I'm your host, Sean, and welcome to 10 Tracks.
Are you ready?
Welcome to 10 Tracks. My guest today is David Hubbell, a Mobile, Alabama resident for over 30 odd years, and he's a chemical engineer with 2 children. He is the co-host of the podcast Rainy Cajun. Although he was originally born in Texas, he has a deep affection for the German-Acadian coast, its history, and its people. He's also an avid fan of Cajun and Creole foods, and he cooks a variety of local vegetables that he grows. Disclaimer, he's also my cousin. Welcome, David.
Hey, Sean, good to see you again.
Yes.
I'm happy to be on the show.
Thank you. Welcome to 10 Tracks. You are in Mobile at the moment?
I sure am.
Okay. Now, for those listening, Mobile, Alabama, close to New Orleans, Louisiana, and then obviously Texas is on the other side of Louisiana.
Right.
But we're going to dive into the connection of how Texan, Alabama, but of course, still in the middle of that is Louisiana and New Orleans, where you've got this center. So tell me about, you were born in Houston, Texas?
Right. My parents are both from Metairie, but their parents and all our ancestors basically came up the German-Acadian coast, which is the parishes of St. James, St. John, and St. Charles Parish along the Mississippi River in Louisiana. And so they ended up growing up on 2, I guess, perpendicular streets in Metairie. Didn't really know each other per se, but they met finally in the late 60s. And actually, I probably won't tell. I have to tell this off air, but my mom actually had seen my dad for years before and had a crush on him. Anyway, clandestine, I guess they ended up meeting and getting married. And he was in graduate school. He was at UNO, got his degree in physics, and then he went to Rice University to pursue a PhD after he got his master's at UNO. So they married in 68, and I was born in 69 in Houston. So by birth, I'm a Texan, but but I think that the heart was in the house was always longing to be back in Metairie, or we were always calling it New Orleans, but it was really to be back in Louisiana. And we ended up migrating up to Dallas, where my brother Thomas was born. My younger sister's also in Houston. And then eventually ended up back in Houston. And then 1986, we ended up moving to Mobile.
And so Mobile's been home ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mobile, as you mentioned, we're both on the Gulf Coast with New Orleans, and we're only, depending on how fast you drive, an hour and a half to 2 hours away from the Metairie area to West Mobile, where I live. And West Mobile is not an official title; it's more of just a colloquial term. But I'm out by the airport in Mobile, so we can get there. And plus, we got an Amtrak going back and forth now between the two, so I can do a scenic route in 4 hours if I want to take a train.
But your 2 girls were born in Mobile. They're
That's
Alabama.
Right. Yeah, they're both Alabama natives, and I guess also to add to the dimensional aspect of it is that I met my wife Astrid at work, and she's actually originally from Germany, so she was born in Germany and migrated to Mobile in '76. So she's been here longer than I have, and it's actually her birthday today, and she's celebrating in Germany with her aunt and brother. So she's closer to you than she is to me right now.
Where is she in Germany?
Zislo, Sislo, how you pronounce it. It's northeast, I think, part of the old Eastern Germany area.
Okay.
It's about an hour and a half, I think was what she said, north of Berlin.
Yeah. Okay. On the east side. Yeah. Um, well, we give her a happy birthday as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I know she'll appreciate it. I'll tell you, she's not real pleased with some of the airlines over there, but she finally got to Germany yesterday morning. So, after 3 days.
one question I have, because you probably know more historically than I do, and I'm ashamed to say it, but you mentioned the German-Acadian area of the coast. Now, there's also a French Acadian as well, which I guess were migrants that came from Canada down to Louisiana. But you might know more historical than I
Well,
do.
yeah. So what it is that that's really the same Acadians is what we're talking about there. What it was is the Germans came over, I think 1702 or so thereabouts, or maybe 1728. It's been a while since I've done it, but our German ancestors sailed over and were some of the original Louisiana immigrants, which people don't always associate with Louisiana. And when they landed in New Orleans, they were basically Germans were kind of they were enticed to come to the state, the New World, by a guy named John Law, because it was going to be like the land of milk and honey. But the Germans were sought after because they were hard workers and farmers, and they really needed that in the new colony. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so they ended up settling north in of New Orleans and more like the St. Charles area. And so you had like what they call the first and second German coast. But then in 1765, so about, I think it was maybe like 40 years after the Germans had settled that coast, that's when the French Acadians had come down from the Nova Scotia area and ended up settling. And then they also migrated up a little further in St. John and St. James parishes. So you had a first, I don't know if it was the first and second Acadian coast. But anyway, they ended up merging those two and basically called them the German-Acadian coast because that's where those two groups of settlers settled. And then they all intermarried. So you end up with some German names that have been, I don't know, Frankified, if that's the right term or not. And so pretty much anybody I go up and if I meet and I recognize a lot of the surnames, I can pretty much figure we're like fourth or fifth cousins to pretty much all of South Louisiana. And
Um,
people may also associate that with the plantation country is another term that they use for that, or the river parishes is what they call that area.
where a lot of the old plantation houses used to be in
Right.
Louisiana. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And those were all around on the outskirts, bayous, or kind of off the river.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they're directly kind of on the river because you had that river frontage for the transportation. They had the old French terms. I think it's arpents or arpents, how it's
Mm-hmm.
spelled, of land. So everybody gets a little bit of the river batcher, and you get some fertile ground, and then you go all the way back to the swamplands. Um, so that's where all those most of those houses dotted up and down. And now you see a lot of refineries out there.
Yeah. I in probably growing up, I don't remember going through a lot of those unless we were going, some of the bigger towns I probably went through, and then of course on the North Shore and further up. But
Hmm.
south and all of the places around there, I'm not that familiar with. I don't know if I had a lot of links or maybe just the odd day trip, but it was not going. I didn't go through a lot of those as a kid.
Yeah, the that's and it's not uncommon when you think about it because with the interstates and even Highway 90, or I guess it would be what airline highway up there with 65, or not
Mm-hmm.
65, but airline highway, you would oftentimes avoid a lot of those areas unless you were specifically going. So I've gone more in the last 26 years since Astrid and I have been married than I did before as a kid, just because I've sought out to try to make the connections with those distant cousins in those areas. But if you're going to Baton Rouge from New Orleans, you would not really you'd see the signs for the places, but you really
Yeah.
won't. It won't direct you. You won't pass by these homes like maybe some shows might give you the impression that all the South is like that or all Louisiana is like that.
Yeah.
Um, so it's
You're
it's
going
not
through a
uncommon,
swamp to get to
right?
the next place.
Yeah, yeah. The swamp would be a little more realistic than it would be in as opposed to the plantation country.
Well, let's dive into your tracks. This is an interesting list. I think there's a lot of stories behind these, um, and I'm very curious to hear some of the backstories a little bit. Why don't we get started with track one? This is the Who with
Hmm.
Squeezebox.
Yeah. So my tracks, as I was telling you, were the music is these are points in time from my childhood, probably growing up around them. Like I said, I'm born in '69, so this would have been time frame around the mid '70s to '78, '79. And having grown up away from New Orleans or Metairie, this would be when we go back and visit the Robert household, my mother's side, and we'd stayed at the house. And so a lot of our aunts and uncles were. I'm the oldest grandson or grandchild, and my mom's the second oldest child. So a lot of the
Of
aunts and
12.
uncles were of 12. Yes,
Yeah.
that's a good point. Of 12. So there's especially the last six or so, there's some overlap where they were in schools and they were getting into their musical interest. And back in the day, we didn't have AirPods or earpods, whatever. You had headphones, but even then, there was one big cabinet stereo, and then there was a little smaller one that the kids kind of got to play with. And I don't really remember many of them having their own stereo sets upstairs. So what consequently would happen is when they played something on an album, everybody heard it in the house. And then also our grandmother had in the kitchen, and the house I'll have to describe it a little bit more, but always had a radio going. And so there were certain songs that would come on from that. So this these songs were ones that just stick out in my mind on our visits in the summer or Christmas time. So the Who Squeezebox, Uncle Craig, he's the youngest son and probably the most musically inclined. He had a band. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but Craig is about 8 years older than I am, and so he's kind of like the older brother I never had.
Mhm.
And so I can remember distinctly him coming into the house that day, and I still got it to a 45 of the Who squeeze
Wow.
box, and I never heard of the Who. I never knew really what rock and roll music was. And there's a green, I think I sent you a picture of what I think it was a GE turntable or tiny little speakers. And I remember him playing it, and there's just something about the sound of the Who and that song, not not realizing what it was all innuendo about at the time. I guess I knew I liked it, but but anyway, it kind of always every time I hear that song, it'll bring me back. There was one of the rooms in the house, they call it the nursery, and the house was converted. It was built in 1921 or 24, I think. And a lot of those New Orleans homes, as you know, had living quarters above and downstairs was mostly kind of storage. But when our grandfather bought the house, it was renovated, so a lot of the rooms downstairs ended up becoming, or a lot of the area downstairs that really wasn't finished ended up becoming finished into these with these 19 late 50s kind of panel. And if you've seen some of the pictures I've shared, some of the I call it almost I don't know if utilitarian is the right term, but functional type of like hospital tiles that you would see, just a real flat vinyl. So anyway, this little room the was kind of a catch-all, and that's where they had the stereo. So around this period of time, Craig brought this home, and I just remembered listening to the Who, and it stuck. And then over the years, as I grew up and learned my own musical taste, I ended up really gravitating toward the Who as being one of my main groups that I've always followed and tried to collect as much of their music as I could. So I've never seen them live, but I have. I'll still every so often, whenever they appear on something, I'll listen to and follow them and see. But like I said, that's my introduction, I guess, my gateway song into the Who.
And when Craig, was he was a musician? Did he actually play
Yes.
in a band or play live and stuff?
Oh yeah, he played. So I think he actually got his. I think Brian had a guitar, and then Craig picked up the guitar sometime in the 70s.
Okay.
And I know by late 78 or so, he was playing with the band up in the early 80s, and then he ended up joining the Navy. And so he was in the Navy as a career Navy sailor, and ended up settling in Pensacola. And all through that time, he was a guitarist, lead singer, and he was really quite talented. So he was not. Some of the other brothers maybe were a little more athletically inclined, but I think Craig really stood out with his musical interest and his a lot of what he some of it I did and some of it I didn't, just but whenever I was near him around this period of time, it had an imprint on the kind of music. So and like I said, it just he played it throughout his life, even up until the time when he passed away about 4 years ago. So and I think, in fact, one of your previous guests and your nephew Max, I believe, actually has one of his guitars.
Oh, that's right. I think I did remember hearing that.
Yeah,
Um, Keeping the music going for sure.
yeah,
Um, Thanks for sharing that. And there's a lot around the family that I want to talk about, but probably we'll save that for a little bit. Um,
yeah.
but let's kind of keep going with some of your songs. And this is track two. Again, from this is 1977, so you're already from 76 with the Who to 77. So
Yeah,
I kind of got a notice there was a around that same time. So this is definitely an influential or a period for you to kind of absorb a lot of this music at that time. So you
right.
would have been what, six or seven?
Uh, 7 to 9,
Yeah,
7 to 8, I think, around that
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Which definitely music is, you're a sponge for some stuff. So
Hmm.
track two is ELO with Telephone Line.
Yeah. Once again, I owe this one to Craig, because he and I've got a an album of the greatest hits that because I remember he had a whole set of albums, but this one in particular that stood out is that the and I don't have this one, the 45 for this one was done on a kind of a translucent green vinyl
Mhm.
in the States. I think all of the ones that I was reading on, doing a little research on it, they came out with different colors, but apparently in the United States it was green. So I think he actually had this one in part of a frame. He played it, but then I think there was a picture that like he had gone down the French Quarter and somebody had done this. That wasn't a caricature, sorry, but it was a just a sketch someone had done of him around that time. Maybe he was eighth, ninth grade, and he had that in there. But ELO was really big, and then I just remembered this song. I guess what stood out to me was the telephone ringtone.
Yeah,
And I didn't realize the fact that until I was doing some kind of like took a cue from Jerry doing a little research on some of the songs because it'd been a while since I'd also really dove into them. That Jeff Lynne actually kind of geared it toward the American audience because I didn't realize there was a difference in the ringtone between Great Britain and the U.S. And so it was an interesting story how they had called over there to a number they knew that nobody would answer, so he could hear that ringtone, record it, and then they used the I guess the synthesizer to be able to recreate it for the album. Um,
yeah,
but with once again with Telephone Line and ELO, I consider like the Who and ELO my two of my top five groups that I always kind of go back and listen to. I just and even when Jeff Lynne was with the Traveling Wilburys, I got into them a lot and just that would have been probably later when I was in college when I learned about like his writing talents and stuff. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, those were some of the things. Like I said, those I think what always impressed me about ELO is because it was an orchestra, and especially when they did roll over Beethoven, and it sounded real classical. And then all of a sudden, uh, I guess Beethoven's Fifth, it starts, and then it goes into the Chuck Berry song,
Mhm.
and so that was also being played a lot on some of the radio stations at the time. So, like I said, that just kind of helped, and I think it's actually on that greatest hits album I've got too.
I think that a lot of the music that you probably would have heard, whether you were, because you would have still been in Houston then, right?
Yeah,
I think that whole kind of southern area would have had some similar music on the radio station. So, hearing ELO on more of the rock stations, the Who for sure,
yeah.
you would have definitely. I would have, because I remember some of these songs growing up and on from the radio. And then I did have a cousin on my mother's side who was big into music and a big Beatles fan, Elton John. So
hmm
I got kind of introduced to a lot of the more classic rock and
Yeah.
probably 70s rock from him with a lot of those bands too. So it resonates around that same time. But I was a few years younger than you.
Right. And to your point now, that was one of the things I was thinking about too. Um, the as I was thinking back, my mom's side, y'all side, our common side of the family, there's a lot of music in there. And even going back to, I think some of our, I was told a story about our great grandparents were named after Rossini. There's Rosine Wagasback and her twin brother Rosny Wagasback, and that was our great grandmother. And they were named because after their father was a fan of Rossini, if I'm saying it right. So it's kind of interesting that that branch had there's that been a thread, but then New Orleans has always been a very musical city.
Yeah,
And
for
and I
sure.
think the other thing is that the abundance of different radio stations that they had, especially the time frame we're talking about. Like I remember the WRNO bumper stickers and the WTIX and
Yeah.
some of the other things that would always play. And so that would be the other aspect that during that time, in addition to albums, is just whatever somebody had on the radio or in the car at the time.
Yep. It is a lot of history around that, and I think that was the thing because this is. I remember when there was a thing like an 8-track cassette to
Yeah.
play in the car, but before you really had cassette, the standard cassettes that would play, you could play in a car. You had the radio, and it was so you were completely influenced by what was played over the radio stations, and not to slag off record companies, but they pretty much had the power over dominated your purchases or what you like.
Oh yeah.
Otherwise you had to go and look to, which is now is way more accessible with streaming services and social
hmm
media, but you wouldn't be able to really get alternative or even alternative rock when it comes to
Yeah.
smaller groups that aren't kind of mainstream or just that are picked up on a big label. I think you
Mhm.
wouldn't find that much. Maybe college radio could play that
Yeah.
more, or even if it was like not ELO, but somebody like Tangerine Dream, who was a little bit more avant-garde and kind of
hmm
abstract. You wouldn't hear that on the regular radio stations or commercial radio. You would have to go to,
Right.
but they obviously got they were people found them and they had
Right.
obviously a big following. But um, yeah, that's interesting.
But yeah, but yeah, I mean, to your point, that was one of the things, and I haven't done a whole deep dive in a while on it, but the New Orleans, I mean, like I said, having grown up away from New Orleans, that was always one of the things that when I'd come across newspapers and I'd see the different listings of the radio stations, I always thought it'd be interesting to be able to tune in because some of them were still, and you still have a few of them today, because the other aspect of South Louisiana, you have those are dedicated to Cajun Creole music,
Hmm.
or Cajun and Zydeco, I should say. Then you've got swamp pop, country, uh, jazz, Dixieland jazz, Southern rock, and there were still a lot of those original radio types that didn't have to conform to the big machine, so to speak, and they did kind of their own thing. And I think that those were really probably influential. And of course, I think those are very they're probably all basically gone, other than maybe one or two in the different cities that you would look for.
It's interesting because when I moved to England and would be, obviously listening to a lot of music, talk to people about music, a lot of times people would ask me about Cajun music and Zydeco music, which actually they had a big following in the UK for that. So it's might not have been something that really uh, transported around the US, but they definitely
Hmm.
found pockets outside of the US where musical fans or people who are interested in, beyond jazz. And New Orleans is obviously
Right.
in the South is famous for blues and jazz. But I think you will find pockets of other parts of the world that are interested in the culture from places like the Zydeco music and Cajun music, and then hopefully can live on a little bit through those channels as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
We get to track three. Now, this is an interesting one. I mean, we talk about Mama's Squeeze Box, and now we talk about Lucille, which
Yeah.
this is Kenny Rogers' Lucille. Sounds like she's a little bit damaged, or this whole relationship,
Yeah.
this whole situation, where
Yeah.
Kenny Rogers wanted to go in a bar and just have a drink, and then met this beautiful young woman um, with 4 kids, apparently. But then the best part of that song to me is when her husband or ex-husband, I don't know where he is in this situation, but he
Yeah.
talks about the fact that she's leaving him with the 4 kids, but also the crop in the field, which again, as
Yeah.
a kid hearing that song, like, what the hell is a crop in the field? I didn't really put it together and understand it, but now I'm like, so this is like, he needs help. There's workers that are missing from fixing the crop.
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the, I mean, that was kind of the song obviously was a big phenomenon at the time. And not that there was a whole lot of big country music fans, although I guess at the time Kenny Rogers had just kind of come off of the, I guess First Edition was the group he had with with another interesting song of Ruby. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
and they must, I think Ruby and Lucille may be sisters, but they, but anyway, but yeah, so I remember once again in that same nursery area that I was telling you about, that somebody had that. I don't remember if it was Uncle Bruce or Jean or somebody had bought it, and it was on a 45 also. I thought I had a copy. I may or may not, but it was this, and it's almost the same exact thing that resonated with you as like, that the words and a crop in the field and once again, I really didn't know what that meant per se either. But then when you really think about it, if you were a farmer and you had to get all that stuff harvested, and then all of a sudden your wife, who you're dependent on to help you harvest it, I mean, not just the marriage falling apart, but then also the crops going to waste out there. Um, but I mean,
Man down.
yeah, but I mean, the I can't remember who the writer was for that song, but it does definitely paints a picture that you can visualize being there, and and not that you feel really sorry for Kenny Rogers as a singer as far as the having to go through all this, but it's just kind of and especially if as I've gotten older and I've met some uh, people who've been in the similar situations, or I've seen maybe some real life Lucille's, I can imagine that they probably were like, yeah, that guy, that either guy on the end. I'm not saying that their emotions were any worse or any better or than Lucille's, but you can just kind of see that it takes on different dynamic when you can view it from the different points of view of the individuals in the song. Um,
I mean,
but yeah, that was one. Go ahead.
it's a moving song, but it
Yeah.
definitely it's got a lot to unpack. The
Mhm.
subject matter is I would say it's you have to be over a certain age to really understand
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
going on in this in the whole situation with Lucille.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the song, it's catchy. You can sing it, but then, like I said, you get to the different stages, and I guess that's what a lot of these different songs as you listen to them and you go through different stages in your life. Of course, a lot of these, when I was listening to them, I was I wasn't even an adolescent at that point. So, I didn't know what a lot of them meant. And then as you you get older, it's like, oh, that's what he meant. Okay. Yeah. And
This is
so,
1977, so
yeah.
was Star Wars came out, maybe
Yep.
Superman or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rocky.
Yeah. Rocky was a few years before that, or 76.
Hmm.
But yeah, so like I said, that was that was another one that I just remember hearing. And I can, and of course, it kind of became one that everybody would sing if somebody was playing it. And part of the thing is that, like you said, with being one of 12, whenever the family members would get together and the grandkids who were around at that time, um, the house was big, but it was had a lot of, I'll call it sharp corners from the standpoint. There wasn't any carpet downstairs. It was all the wood paneling. Um, and so you would have a lot of, and it was pretty much a kind of an open, I say an open pattern in the sense there's one main hallway that went from you come in the back door, and that's what they call the utility room. And I sent you a picture where Craig was coming through the door. And that was where you had your washer dryer. But then you had a counter right to the right of that was facing the stove, and that went right into the kitchen. Well, with that overflow of 12 kids, you only had so much table space. And so you had, I think it was probably about another 6 seats up there. And then that hall end up going to the grandparents' bedroom. And there's a little nursery, and then there's a bathroom, and then it was just basically a channel to go down. But
Hmm.
then the other part on the other side of that wall was what opened up to, which was basically a living room or a dining room, living room area. And then once again, I sent you some pictures of that. Once again, everything was the paneling and the tile floor type thing. So there wasn't like a lot of barrier to separate. So if you heard, you could hear a lot of noise throughout. So anyway, if someone was playing Lucille, subsequently you'd have people joining in and singing.
From other
So
rooms.
yeah. And I can't remember if somebody, and like I said, there's a story about, and I don't know if you want to keep it PG or what, but every so often, I think when you pick the fine time to leave me, Lucille, somebody would always subsequently shout, that bitch or something like that. So I don't know if that was from that period or for something when Asher and I were talking about the song, but yeah.
We you talked a little bit about Cajun Creole food and you growing vegetables. I know you post a lot about this and share on Facebook. And
Hmm.
uh, now, one of the vegetables, which again I remember growing up as a small kid, but they're very live in well in Alabama with you, is Militon.
Yeah, the Melitone.
Melitone.
Yeah. Well, people say it a lot of different ways, but Melitone, but outside of South Louisiana, chayote squash or choco or I mean, it's found throughout like the Latin American and Asian countries, and
Mhm.
so it's really it's also called a vegetable pear in the United States. So it's a member of the cucupid family, and basically it's became real popular in New Orleans because of the Haitian immigration. Some will also say the Isleños immigrants that came, like in St. Bernard Parish. But for whatever reason, by the time you and I were children, it had been in the New Orleans dinner menu for at least 200 years. And so it's a fall crop primarily. And so you would end up having it on the Thanksgiving and Christmas tables. And so,
Now, what about stuffed? You would stuff them, right? Is that how you would
yeah,
make them? Okay.
that you can actually do many ways. And actually, for a while, New Orleans had, like it does many other things, had a Meliton festival.
Hmm.
But stuffed is the most popular way. And what you would
I
do
think
is,
that's how I've had them.
yeah, so you would take it, you boil it, you it's got a very thin shell or skin on it, if you will, and then you cut it. You after you boil it like a potato, it becomes soft, and then you kind of scoop out the inside, and then you mix that with the trinity of vegetables, the aromatics, the onion, bell pepper, and celery, and garlic, which isn't they call the Pope with the Trinity. And so you mix those together, and then you mix it back with the Melitol pulp, and then to that you can add things like shrimp, crab meat, uh, or ground pork, ground beef, ham, and you mix all that together, season it with some salt, black pepper, cayenne, granulated garlic, and then some breadcrumbs, and you stuff it back into the shell and bake it. And so you can either put it like that, or you could just take that whole inside and just make it as a casserole.
Yeah.
But it's been part of the, like I say, the what I describe in the group that I work with, Militon.org, and it's spelled Mirliton.org, is that the vine will grow from 30 to 100 foot long, and it'll put on up to about 100 fruit in a year or in a season. So, New Orleans being uh, predominantly Catholic
Mhm.
and also associated with big Catholic or with Catholics or big Catholic families. So you could have this one vine, and if you had 12 kids, um, you could end up having plenty to put on the table, not just at Thanksgiving, but if you split those Meliton in half and you had 12 kids, all you would need is maybe 6 or 7 if you count the adults to stuff them if everybody's just having one serving. And if it grows 100 over the course of a couple of months, you could be eating Meliton for two good months. Which oddly enough, our grandfather didn't grow. He got it from a good friend of his, Dan Boudreau, and that's the one that I'm actually growing. Is that I got Dan lived to be 97 and passed away, I guess about 5 or 6 years ago. But when I started looking for him 15 years ago, our Uncle Gary got me some, and we planted at my parents' house in Fairhope, Alabama, across the bay from Mobile. And then I've been growing them here in my house in Mobile for about 15 years now. So, and it's become sort of one of these iconic but yet nostalgic vegetables that people remember, especially the generation before you and I,
Mhm.
uh, because everybody's yard, it seemed like in New Orleans or Metairie, had these Meliton vines, or if you didn't have one, your neighbor did. And
Yeah.
also the other part would be is that because they made so many, if I see Sean, all of a sudden it's like, hey, I got something for you, and you get giving you gifts of Meliton to the point where if you see somebody coming, you turn the lights off and you you duck down so they don't think you're home.
Yeah, I could imagine. I remember eating this kid. I'm trying to, now that you're telling me the different ingredients and stuff with, I don't know if it was crab that could be, or meat or something. Maybe it was pork. I don't remember, but I do remember having them as a kid and always saying, "Oh, we got these from somebody." Because again, we didn't have any vines, but somebody would
Yeah.
give them to us, and and they would already be pre-made. So yeah. Um, Now, where does it at home? You're more cooking Cajun and Creole, yet
Mhm.
does Astrid take more of the German still, or how does
Yeah.
this duel in your house with kind of flavors?
It really depends on who's got the time and now that the kids are out of elementary and high school and such, we have a little bit more time. Although, like I said, my drive to work is I got a 2 hour round trip to work. So
Ooh.
when I do most of my Cajun Creole cooking, it'll be kind of the weekends.
Hmm.
But there's some things that she does where she'll keep up with the German traditions, especially more so as the kids have their taste buds have evolved to the point where they're willing to eat more of the things. And plus, as Astrid has gone back, this is her second trip back since she was a kid. On her first trip, she was able to kind of reconnect and find some brands that you can actually get a lot of, I say pre-made. And actually, we have Aldi's over here now in the South. And so
Mm.
this month, they tend to have their German foods available. So there's
Oktoberfest.
something, yeah. So we have an opportunity to get some pre-made, prefab stuff. So there's some quick things like some sauerbraten mixes that she can do. She can just get the meat and kind of put it together. So, and I mean, you can do the same thing with Cajun Creole. I can buy gumbo mixes and jarred roux and have a decent gumbo or jambalaya in 30, 40 minutes. And you can do the same thing with the German foods. So, it just depends. Sometimes I'll try my hand at doing the German foods if there's things that she doesn't care for.
Hmm.
Um, and plus the fact I get to be the guy who experiments more with the meats and stuff because I get to clean the poultry and stuff, and nobody else wants to deal with all that stuff, that aspect of it. Um, but yeah, but I mean, I think our goal is really, I don't know if I'd call it a goal, but our unofficial goal is just, make the show the girls are both exposed to their connections to their different ancestral lines. And like I said, we have German. You and I have the German ancestry as well. So for us, it's kind of I get to reconnect with some of it. Um, my mom always has done a German. I think it's called a Hausplatter, or it's like a she did this when I was a kid, even before I met Astrid. But it's like the mashed potatoes and some braised ribs that were in some sort of wine, some sauerkraut that was on the bed, and then you have the different type of Weisswurst and Knockwurst and bratwurst on top of it, and kind of
Hmm.
you put it in the oven, and it's just. And I have to send you a picture of it because she did it several years ago. And as of course, I got older and I could drink the German beers. It all kind of complemented it. So as a kid, I didn't care for the sauerkraut, but now that I'm older, it's like that's also a memory, more so from when we were living away, and she did that versus Louisiana.
Yeah. We get to track 4.
Yeah.
This is from the soundtrack, Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, Jesus Christ Superstar, King Herod's Song.
Yeah. So this was probably one of the this was at the tail end of the whole rock opera, or maybe not the tail end, but part of the whole rock opera aspect of, you had the Who with Tommy, and later they had Quadrophenia, and then I think the Kinks had some rock operas as well. But uh, Jesus Christ Superstar was something that it was one of these songs, and I think actually my dad, even though he wasn't very religious from that standpoint, he knew the songs because it was played, and I guess it was catchy enough. It was kind of almost like I would almost equate it to Hamilton today, which I know from listening to the other show, you're not real familiar with Hamilton,
No.
and I'm only
But
I'm
well, you
only
could. I took Mighty Python for this. This kind of gave me a little bit of that sort of kind of tongue in cheek. I thought
Yeah, well,
for
this song, right? Yeah, this one in particular, like, yeah, you can kind of definitely see. Actually, I was reading that this was a reworked song that he had already written. They had something earlier in '68. And you can find it on YouTube. This woman singing, and it's not the exact same lyrics, but
mm,
it's very similar. But they kind of retooled it for the story. But the I think my mom told me Uncle Bruce had this album, which was a two album, which I've got the CDs over here.
yeah, it was
But I
a
mean,
double album, right?
it's a
Four.
double album, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So that you you would have to play it, and and you play it in order and tells the story of basically the Passion of Christ in rock opera form.
yeah,
Uh, and so being a very Catholic family, it was kind of interesting to me that because if you viewed certain lyrics without the whole context of what the rock opera was about, some of it may come off as blasphemous in certain things, and especially
sacrilegious. Yeah,
in sacrilegious. In Herod's song, there's a part where if you're the Christ, walk across my swimming pool and do all these miracles and stuff like that. And to your point, yeah, I didn't think about that connection from a Monty Python standpoint, that you could see that kind of the tongue in cheek and using those type of imagery. And I guess that's what kind of appealed to me. I think with a lot of these songs is there's a lot of good, clever lyrics that were
yeah,
were were put together from these different writers, and so those things I could visualize. But this came out in 1970, the concept album before the the movie that came out in, I think, early '70s, and so that's what I think Bruce or somebody would come home from school, is what my mom would say, and he'd put the album on, and so just and this was even younger, so I would base, let me say, 3 or 4, and I think there's a part where one of the guys, I think it's Judas, is saying, singing Jesus, and I think apparently I would sing that a lot as a 3-year-old. Um, but like it's one of those that I'll listen to it during Lent, the whole album, just as kind of it ties me back. At the same time, it's kind of it's an interesting way to hear about this aspect from the Christianity and all that. So,
Mm.
like I said, I don't think there was actually anything from a Catholic standpoint that there was a concern or you know, negative standpoint. I think I read that even Pope Paul VI, who was Pope at the time, said they said he enjoyed it. Not that I imagine a Pope rocking out to a rock opera at any
Yeah.
point, but so I thought about it in terms with a lot of this music being played at the house, whether our grandparents would have been, turn that crap off type of thing. But I think that there's a certain amount of appreciation and tolerance for it that it was, as long as it wasn't really bad. And I think that, if it was something if somebody's singing about Jesus, maybe that's not a bad thing. So I think it was a good way back then, I guess, to maybe reconnect because I was all start at the end of the hippie movement, so to speak,
Yeah.
and to tie it back in. So that's, like I said, that it's just a catchy tune, I think, is part of the reason it has always stuck with me.
It's like not knowing the song from knowing a few of the other tracks off of the soundtrack. I didn't really familiar with this one, so when I listened to it for the first time recently, when you shared your list, I was like, wow, okay. And again, if you take it out of context and take it as an independent sort of song, it does seem quite blasphemous, or it can give that impression. But I think when you put it in context, it definitely doesn't. It kind of goes with what it's supposed to be. But it's an interesting again time that, and I think that they were very bold in the type of words they were writing. Again, I'm not a
Yeah.
big Andrew Lloyd Webber fan, although we've had a couple of I think one song was picked already on the, or somebody who was married to, who is who's been in a lot of his recordings and stuff.
Oh, okay.
But it's interesting because I'm not as familiar with the live, I guess, kind of show types of like
Yeah.
Hamilton and this and some other Andrew Lloyd Webber stuff.
What I found interesting too is that I was looking at because the lead singer who I say the lead singer, the guy who played Jesus was from I think the group Deep Purple, and so they had a they had some, I guess it was a mix of some rockers and some not really Broadway but theater, musical theater performers. But this guy, I think his name is wrote it down, Mike Dabo, or D apostrophe AVO. So I was looking at it, and what was interesting is that he was, I think he wrote, he actually was front man for the group. If you remember Manfred Mann, if you remember
Yeah,
hearing them, I think he
yeah, yeah.
apparently joined them. But he also co-wrote a song that one of your previous guests, it's on her list, on Genevieve's list, "Build Me Up Buttercup."
Yeah.
And so I thought that was I was listening to that because that one just came out before us doing this, and I was like, "Huh, it's interesting that this guy his somehow or other he's connected to two of these lists." Just with some of those, like I said, sometimes I think of music and being sort of in silos that you only find it in certain places, but when you really dig deeper and some of the personnel behind it, you really start seeing there's a lot of overlap and such and influences.
Well, I mentioned it to Jared when I had him on, and his pick the song by Sleep called "Dope Smoker." But
Yeah.
there's another guest who's coming up. He'll in a few weeks from where we are now, and he picked it as well. So
Huh.
it was like it's a song again. I would have never thought that my path
Huh.
would have crossed it twice within a month. From two
Yeah.
different people who have no connection to each other or any
Hmm.
and something like a little bit more kind of abstract. It's not like a song that's massive hit on the radio or something that was like the
Yeah.
Who or established artists from from many generations.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of an artist from many generations,
Yeah.
when we get to track 5, and I remember this album from 1970. I was obviously younger, but this is
Yeah.
Billy Joel with "Only the Good Die Young."
Yeah, this is another Catholic theme type of, or not Catholic theme, but in this case, it is kind of more poking fun at certain aspects of the trying to stay chaste and all this with this young girl and this guy who's trying to talk her into doing something that she's not willing to do.
Her name's
But
not Lucille for sure, right?
no, no, yeah, no. That's what he should have done is he should have found Lucille and then he would have had a better chance.
Would have been a
But
different song for sure.
yeah. But this was one I just kind of remember. Billy Joel, I think, kind of crossed over uh, a couple of the aunts and uncles list, and I can remember, like I said, anywhere from it would have been Bruce and in the order of birth. You had Bruce, Kevin, Keith, Jean, and so right around that same time frame would have been they all would have graduated from high school and started college in a lot of cases or started working. And so the Strangers, the album that this came off of, it was yeah phenomenal. I think he had just come off the real big hit with Piano Man and such. And so I remember this one at one of the family get-togethers and they were playing it, and of course the young adults being at the point of being able to drink some, everybody was singing along with this "Only the Good Die Young," and I just remembered as I got older and grew a little bit more in my interest in my religion, Catholicism, I thought, you know, it's really pretty clever the phrases he uses and such, and I mean I kind of admire the crafting of the song. Now, on the other hand, it's in some ways you could look at it as being ridiculing some of the things, but at the same time, I think, it's like, and I think he even made a comment. He said it was a not anti-Catholic, but pro-lust song is what Billy Joel said about it. But uh, he says, ultimately, he pointed out that the girl's virtue stays intact and she stays strong. So that's kind of the other message. He wasn't able to persuade her with all his smooth talking and clever
Yeah.
lines. Um, but like I said, that one to me is just it's kind of a I don't know if I should say it's fun to sing, but it's an interesting one to kind of sing along, and it's got a lot of those songs that he did around that time frame. Were very once again, it also paints a lot of pictures. That and song, the other one um, was Scenes from Italian Cafe, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
Um, that was also played a lot in the same kind of gatherings with the family. And we even actually, talking about 8 tracks, my parents bought a stereo and we had 3 8-track tapes. Two of them were Pete Fountain that my dad had, and this one was the only other one that we had. And so we would listen to it when we were back in Houston. And so that, and I think Glass Glass Houses was another one that Jean or somebody bought a few years later. But
Yeah.
yeah, this was
This
all
was
around that same.
1978, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess it was his big breakout album that year because I think he has a lot of them on there that were big hits.
So is it tough for you to move, from kind of starting out in Houston and growing up there, because you were in what, 15 when you moved?
I was going in my senior year of high school
Okay, so you
when we
already had an
moved.
established group of friends from Houston.
Yeah,
Obviously you by leaving high school, maybe you would have gone to college somewhere else anyway.
right.
But how was that then, kind of with that transition from?
Well, in some ways it was tough, but at the same time it really wasn't because what ended up happening is that so the tough part was the fact that we moved to Houston, back to Houston in 78. So from 5th grade through 11th grade, I basically had the same group of friends. Um, and of course, as we're talking about, these are pivotal times when you're an adolescent. Also, to add to it is that the high school I was at, Cy-Fair High School in Houston, Cypress, northwest of Houston, we had gone to the state semifinals the year before. I played on the football team. So, I mean, we got to go, we played in all these big stadiums. We played at Rice University Stadium, Baylor Stadium in Waco twice, practiced in the Astrodome, and then played at the old Dallas Cowboy Stadium or Texas Stadium in Dallas.
Mhm.
so we had just gotten to that point, but what ended up happening is that um, the oil crunch, I guess is what you called it, in the late 80s or mid to late 80s hit. So my dad ended up having to look for a job, and he ended up actually driving all the way and taking a job in New York State. And the initial plan was that we were actually going to probably have to move to New York until he got up there and he started working there and he realized he did not like New York, which we found an old Jim Croce song around the time New York ain't New York's not my home type of thing, and
Yeah.
that kind of made us think about that. But he ended up getting this job in Mobile that he had applied for even beforehand, and so when we got to kind of all reconnect and back in Mobile, while it was sad that we had to leave, the plus side was that for me, I was going to be going off to college probably in another year anyway, so I was missing 1 year with these folks. And then we were an hour and a half to 2 hours away from New Orleans, which meant that we could just, as opposed to having a big trip, which was like anywhere from 8 hours, or when we lived in Dallas, 10 to 12 hours driving, and an all day event, we could go we could leave early in the morning, relatively early, get to Metairie, hang out, visit stores, get supplies, and bring them back to, if you know what I mean, and
Yeah.
then visit with family, and then come back home at a reasonable time. And so for the first couple of months, it seemed like every weekend we were going back to Metairie. Um, and then but there's also with Mobile, you've got a lot of the cultural aspects, as I was sharing with you. If there's a sign that I pass by every day for the last 25 years outside of Mobile, and it's a historical marker, and it says the first capital of, or the first capital of French colonial Louisiana was the old fort of Mobile. So I tell everybody in Mobile that I'm really still living in Louisiana, uh, but there's the same people that founded New Orleans were the ones who founded Mobile.
Mm.
And there's a big argument that goes back and forth where the first Mardi Gras was in New Orleans versus Mobile, and everybody in Mobile says no, it's in Mobile. And
I've heard that.
yeah, so what it is if you really look at it, there's a little bit of, there was the first celebrations of sorts, or understanding that there was Mardi Gras when they landed at Mardi Gras Point in New Orleans. But then the same group of people, basically everybody ended up in Mobile. So then, a year later or so, they're celebrating either with some type of food or some type of celebration. So it'd be like whether it's at your house or my house, we're still the same family. And well, who served it first? Does it really matter? It all came from the same source. But
Yeah.
in context of, I guess if you look at it from distances in Europe and stuff, you know, Mobile and New Orleans region, we just have a lot of commonality. So it I think it's more of a tourism PR type of thing to say one's got the better one versus the other. Um,
It's
Sometimes
like
actually, though,
who's got the best king cakes and who makes the best king
well,
cakes. And
Louisiana does. I'll say that. I'm biased, obviously, still.
but I think there's other places in Louisiana that do. I know on the North Shore they have Mardi Gras, so I think they go a bit further. I don't know if I remember Lafayette might do a version
Oh
of it
yeah,
as well. So
yeah, they
if you
have
think
the
about context of distance, it's what 3 hours from Lafayette to New Orleans, or just under Baton Rouge is an hour and a half or so. And
yeah,
then if you think the distance from Mobile, it's the fact that it's in another state, I think, is what rubs people maybe in New Orleans.
right,
It's not so much the like if they're doing it as well or celebrating it,
yeah,
and because it's not a New Orleans only thing. It's
right.
but maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's part of it. Is that, and of course, in the last 20 something years, if you're an SEC college football fan, when Nick Saban left LSU to go to Miami first in pros, and then ended up at Alabama, University of Alabama, and they dominated. Then all of a sudden, everybody just, you know, they hate the Alabama football team because of their skill. I mean, I still fly my LSU flag out in front of my house every weekend during football season. But um, at the same time, it it's one of those things. I think people just some people can do it in good fun and laugh. Like I said, I think people ought to just be appreciative if you have an opportunity to have a Mardi Gras, whether it's in New Orleans or Mobile or any of the areas in between. Take advantage of it if you enjoy doing that sort of thing. I'm more about the foods and music of Mardi Gras than I'm actually am about wanting to stand out in the streets and get pelted with stuff or deal with a lot of the humanity at times.
Yeah, for sure. We come to track 6. This is Paul Simon.
Hmm.
There's a sub theme here, even though it's in the same genre. But we got Lucille, we got
Yeah.
Billy Joel, and now 50 Ways to Leave Your Love. So now you want to get rid of Lucille. We got to figure out a way to.
Well, you realize all the baggage about Lucille, so you're trying to figure out how to creep out the room before she catches you. Um, the Yeah, so this was another one of those. Like I said, it was December of '75 is what I think when Paul Simon put it out, and I
Mhm.
think what the memory that stands out with this one is that it had to be about maybe the summer of '76 when we were visiting, and Jared's mom, Cindy, she was coming over. She had been married a couple of years, and I think this was also there's a lot of people go back and look at the styles of clothes and hair back in the '70s. Um, about mid, it was funny is actually to look at some of the books, the high school books where Keith and Kevin were in at Rummel, and you'll see pictures of these guys that were freshmen, and they're all clean cut, looks like the 1960s horn rim glasses. And then by the time they're seniors, they all got sideburns and long hair and these ruffled tuxedos that they're wearing at the
Yeah.
time. And so the fashion, I think at the time is that women were starting to get their hair permed. And I think I remember in particular what happened is Cindy had, most of our family members have either wavy to straight kind of hair, a lot of the aunts and uncles. And so I think Cindy had gotten some type of perm. I may be not remembering it correctly, but something like, you look like you stuck your finger in a light socket type of thing. But uh, what resonated is at the time that they were, that song was popular. And I remember her either it was on the radio or she was making, or she was listening to it or in some of the context. But the song just is one of those other ones that's kind of catchy. I mean, it's kind of like a rap in some ways. Um,
Yeah.
and so, as a young kid and when you're learning stuff, it was easy to kind of learn this song, slip out the back jack. And of course, it has all that '70s jive talk, if you want to call it that, that was being portrayed on all that, TV shows and movies and stuff like that, Shaft and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of funny coming from like Paul Simon.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's a great song, and I think it's still, you know, I think it stands up today.
Yeah.
Whereas some songs sound really dated. I think this one still has this vibe that you can hear it, played and still has a lot of relevance and kind of the humor, but also just the sound is. Some of the Simon and Garfunkel, which I like, they're definitely a little bit
Hmm.
dated, but it has that nostalgia feel or a very '60s vibe.
Yeah.
Whereas this kind of it does have a more modern kind of vibe to it, which again taking on some. I like the idea you saying about almost like rapping. It's true. It's got that not just the step out the back jack, but just his whole storytelling of the song is
Yeah.
kind of like if you were, kind of country or rap, that kind of
Hmm.
it's a story that you're portraying in this. So
Yeah, I don't, and think back. I think I might have one. I think I might have my brother's copy of Graceland that he put out, I guess, 10, 12 years later. Paul Simon did. I mean, I think I tend to gravitate more to a lot of Paul Simon solo work than, especially from that time to the Graceland
mhm.
albums. Then, I mean, I remember Simon and Garfunkel a lot of times. I might have confused them even with the Beatles with some of the harmonies and such, some of the early songs, but I appreciate him, but I think I like Paul Simon stuff, that Kodachrome, more than me and Julio down by the schoolyard type of stuff than to the work they did as a duo. So,
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your podcast, the Rainy Cajun podcast.
okay. Um, so as you've alluded to already, and we've talked about my interest in South Louisiana, uh, I, I got interested in cooking and growing the vegetables. The growing the vegetables kind of came out of the cooking because uh, years ago, and it all actually kind of stems back to the same house. Our grandmother had a book by Chef John Folse called Evolution of Cajun and Creole Cooking.
Mhm.
And there was all these fascinating stories in there about the techniques and all that. So as I got older, I always kind of was familiar with it. And then through work, I actually met a guy from South Louisiana who told me about what I thought was the same book. And he goes, no, there's an Encyclopedia of Cajun Creole cooking that Chef John Folse put out. It's like 800 pages and 8 pounds. It's a huge book. And it's the 200 pages of history, all the different recipes and foods that you can think of, and then a bunch of resources. Well, that really kind of got me into that, and then finding out that, well, I can't buy a Meliton or a Creole tomato in Mobile, so I need to either learn how to grow those things, and that led me into a path of starting to talk to, uh, at the advent of the internet and forums, even before Facebook. I met some of the cousins from the river parishes. So I started learning a lot about the culture and the histories. And so much, like I said, now I got it's in pots, but I got sugar cane growing in my backyard, the melitons, some of the varieties of Louisiana foods. And then I've got like 60, no, 80 Cajun Creole cookbooks, much to Astrid's uh, hardship that the bookcases are full of that. So that, and then the genealogy that I've done, all that kind of led to my interest in just kind of keeping up with that and meeting people. And over the years, my cousin on the Hubbell side, Jeremy, he lives in Seattle, and so he was interested in trying to draw upon his uh, Louisiana connections, and so he started a podcast called the Rainy Cajun, with him being in Seattle and being one of the most rainy cities in the country. Well, Mobile is actually considered one of the rainiest cities as well. So after a few episodes, he asked if I wouldn't mind joining him on some of it. So he and I have been teaming up, and initially we did some like recreating recipes that you could buy, some of those mixes we talked about, some of the gumbos and stuff. And he would cook it, and I would cook it, and we'd compare. And it's like, yeah, this one tastes like a really good gumbo. And then there's a couple of them that were like, yeah, this is okay, but not that great.
Yeah.
But then the last several years, or several episodes, we've really kind of tied into some of the people with the interesting histories. Um, so, like, if you can see, I got Sal's snowball shirt on. Sal's is
Okay.
a snowball shirt, a snowball purveyor in Metairie, on Metairie Road, up the street from where our grandparents had lived. Um, we got up with actually the guy who owns it. His cousin lives here in Mobile. So we got up and we interviewed him, and he gave us a great history about not just Sal's, but the whole snowball history of New Orleans, and
Hmm.
um, and so there's like Hanson's and some of these other uh, neighborhoods tend to have these different um, snowball stands, and then we talked to some folks with Cajun architecture, or uh, the other thing that's kind of interesting is it's also called Hanson's, but if you're familiar with like the leper colony up in Carville, up the river. I mean, the only leper colony in Louisiana, I mean, in the United States, was in Louisiana, in Carville. Um, there's a woman who we actually are distantly related to. Her parents were uh, sent to that leper colony in the 40s, 30s, and 40s. And they met and they married, and they weren't supposed to, and they weren't supposed to have kids, but they did. So she's keeping that alive, and she gave us a wonderful history on Carville. So we went from just talking about foods, where we do interview some of the people like Marcel Bienvenu out of Lafayette, and a couple of guys who do gumbos, or do food related things, to others that some of the history and culture of South Louisiana. So we try to get them on and do a video podcast and put it on YouTube and just kind of explore and learn from them and try to get it to people like you and I who are not living in Louisiana to maybe want to reconnect, give us an opportunity to say, I didn't know that about Louisiana. That's pretty interesting. So that's kind of what we've been doing. We don't have a regular schedule like we'd like to because both of us do this as a side deal. But we still got a couple more episodes coming out. And plus, we covered the boucherie that Chef Folse does at White Oak Estates and Baton Rouge. So we just our little way of kind of sharing with the world some of the interesting things about Louisiana.
That sounds great. I'll make sure to put a link so people can find it and check it out.
Thanks.
We get to track 7.
Yeah.
This is Alan O'Day, Undercover Angel. This is a bit, this to me it sounds a little bit campy. And I think like this song I could see myself when I was younger. I remember in the 70s, late 70s, roller skating in summer camp. They would go roller skating at Skate Country or something in Metairie, and hear a song like this,
this is not like a song that I just rock out to or anything, but it's probably to me one of the maybe 2 or 3 of the songs I think of. Well, maybe 4 of some of the worst songs from the 70s. But what I remember is just like what you're saying is that not so much from the skating, but as I was describing the kitchen at a grandmother's house, she always had this clock radio up on the refrigerator. And I think it was, I don't know if it was WBYU or some of these stations, but in the mid 70s, this would have been some sort of pop 40 song. So I think for some of those stations actually would also kind of bridge over. You'd play songs back from the big band era or swing, and then also you'd play something that was modern, and then they'd switch back. So it was pretty eclectic. But I seem to remember because this and the big show on TV at the time was Charlie's Angels, and so the Undercover Angel just, I mean, it was unfortunately, it's like, what do they call that? Time earworm or something that gets in your ear, and the song just keeps gnawing at your brain. And I had actually kind of forgotten about it till about a year or 2 ago. One of my coworkers and I were talking about it, and the line, I said, "What?" And
yeah, exactly.
But I mean, the guy has a fantasy of I don't know if it's a guardian angel or something coming, and they get romantically involved, and while he's pining away for not having any love, and then she tells him one day he's going to meet the right one, and he will see her in his eyes. He will see her in the woman's eyes, the right woman's eyes. And there's like, I think that, and then Afternoon Delight, and You're Having My Baby, and there's another one that are probably to me like some of the for whatever reason they hit big with the public, but they're really kind of awful in my respect to me.
It's got a naff in a way, not just has that sort of but yeah, it's just, and it's funny because I hadn't heard that song in I don't know how long. So when I played it, I was like, oh, I remember this song. But again, I wouldn't have thought about it, or sometimes I dig on some playlists on Spotify, looking for some more classic songs from the 70s or this or that, or even rarer ones, but never came across this one. But I knew it as soon as I heard it, and it brought me back. And that's why I said, I think the only thing that resonated or made me think of it could have been like Skate Country or something like roller skating we would do in the summer camp. But I'm sure I heard it on the radios or something else. But it's an interesting one.
Yeah, like I said, that's what a lot of these songs do, is that if I hear them, even if it's been 40, 50 years since I've heard them, it takes me back to that point of we were either running in or outside the yard, coming inside and just it came on the radio, and I think I'm transported back to the kitchen there for a little bit of time, just hearing that, and the next song that you'll get into that's on the list there too. Once again, these aren't they're just ones that I hear now, and it's like, brings me back to being, like I said, 8 or 9 years old, for better or for worse with them.
Track 8 is he just goes by Keith. There's no last name,
Yeah.
just Keith with a K.
Yeah.
98.6. And again, the same similar vibe. I just brought me back, and I remember. Uh,
All I can think of, because this song actually came out in 66,
yeah,
and this is like 10 years, I'm saying 10 years later that I remember hearing it. So either it was big in New Orleans, or maybe it was big on this one station. There might have been one person who just really dug it. But I guess the other thing is I can even remember at a point when I got to be maybe a few years later, and I remember hearing it again, and I was like, "Oh, wait, that's a body temperature, 98.6. Oh, that's kind of clever." So I think maybe that's the other reason that maybe as a kid, it kind of I kind of remembered it, but I like it better than Undercover Angel.
but it maybe used in a commercial as well or something? Because I kind of feel like I thought the reference they're trying to tie in is not so much about the body temperature, but also it's like a radio station, 98.6. And
Oh,
that's
it could
kind
have
of
been.
and that's kind of the way
Yeah,
I heard his, like, thinking he was like
I didn't think
tuning
about
into
that.
that. But the
Yeah,
whole body temperature is a cool another again to
yeah, and yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. But that would be a perfect marketing song to use for that. And I don't remember in Houston. Well, I'm trying to remember if, because it's been so long since tuning into call, not call letters, but tuning into a station that there's two or three I might listen to in Mobile now, but they're usually more on the talk end.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'd have to look and see if there was any in New Orleans or Houston or even Dallas when we were living there that might have had those. That would have been something that would have imprinted that even more,
Yeah.
because I never thought about that aspect of it. But I think you're right.
We get to track 9. This is now this was a bigger band, but this is from 1975. So I'm trying to think of where they were in terms of their kind of stardom and big. They had 60s hits, but yet I
Right.
think was it 77 that they kind of came out with their big, where they were like, huge.
Well, yeah, I think, and talking about the Bee Gees and Nights on Broadway.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that you and I probably really, and I think for most of the rest of the world, the phenomena of Saturday Night Fever is what really brought the Bee Gees into a whole new light, I guess. Because I mean, they'd been around. That's what amazed me when I was older and I found out they'd been around since like the either late 50s or early 60s as
Yeah.
kids singing. And what I think right was a precursor is that, a lot of the songs that I attribute this all to Aunt Jean, because I know she was into the Saturday Night Fever album time frame, but also she had this live album. It's called Here at Last, Bee Gees Live. And she was
Mhm.
playing that. And what they were playing were a lot of these songs, which all sounded to me almost like the same style as what Saturday Night Fever. But when I go back and listen to them, I realized that they were really kind of precursors in a lot of ways to that style that they ended up evolving into. Um, but I think it was that album in that this song that came out in September '75 off of
Yeah.
one of their other albums, but it has a lot of the components. So I listened to it again a couple of days ago, and I've forgotten about it. It's got this kind of funky beginning, and and then there's even a part where it kind of harmonizes and almost has like a Beatlesque type of harmony, and then it gets back to the funk. But I think it all what I think becomes known, or I associate it with the whole Saturday Night Fever style of music. Um, and like I said, there's a lot of the songs that could have been off of any of those Bee Gees, but she was playing the album. It would have been on the big stereo in the living room, the console type of system. And I think it was so much so that I told you earlier, I had my first two of my first two albums, full albums, was this. I was like 7 or 8. I got the this live album, I got the ELO Greatest Hits, and I have a Andy Gibb album that came out at the
Yeah.
same time.
I remember, I think he kind of came out not far after,
Right.
or was, well, kind of blew up as well a little bit. But
Yeah. Well, yeah, because Barry was basically writing all the songs, and then the Bee Gees were backing him. So it was basically, to me, another Bee Gees album. Just he was taking the lead song
yeah.
or the lead vocals.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that they're from Liverpool. I might be wrong, or
I
the
think
north.
they, yeah, I think they ended up migrating to Australia. Is what happened as kids, or
Right.
and,
But there were some big hits that I remember coming back to probably later on that I heard, that I remember. Like, so early songs from them, like "How Can You Mend the Broken Heart,"
yeah,
which was some of their early stuff that's not very similar to like "Staying Alive" and all that. Then you have this
yeah,
one, "New York Mining Disaster,"
yeah,
and then "I Started a Joke," which I think there was a singer by the name of Lulu. You might not know. I don't know.
yeah. I remember Lulu. Yeah,
She did a cover of it as well, and I think she was dating Barry Gibb, so there was a connection. Like
yeah,
reason for like how it's like similar to Marianne Faithfull with the Rolling Stones. There was
yeah, yeah.
always like this and this and that. So they had quite a lot of success, but I think what
Hmm.
blew them off the kind of the charts was around Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive
Yeah,
and all of that, which was just, and again, that was probably pivotal to the whole disco pop era as well.
yeah,
So I remember that was 77, so I would have been 6, but still it
yeah.
was still very influential, and kind of just you see all of this.
Well, yeah, in fact, I mean, there's some early memories of your sister Stacy. Is that there was something that she would do, and I don't know if there's some dance move John Travolta. I don't actually think I've ever watched all Staying. I think I have because I watched Staying Alive, the sequel, only because of the fact Stallone had directed it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some dance move that he does, and John Travolta doesn't think Stacy would do that, and she was maybe 2 or so. So the impact of the phenomena in the movie, I mean, it lasted. Good Lord, it seemed like it lasted about 2 or 3 years with that whole thing, and I guess the only thing that kind of, I don't know if it saved John Travolta, but I mean, kind of he switched over to Grease, so it kind of changed the styling. But I think the Bee Gees kind of just became so associated with disco that and I got to a very anti-disco phase for which I still I'm not really, but I think you talked about it on one
Let
of y'all's
go,
shows.
David. Let go. Embrace disco. Come on.
There's a song by the Who, Goodbye, was it Goodbye Sister Disco, something like that.
Yeah.
But but I think the thing about it is that it all becomes an automatic turn off in some respects. Like I hate this style. And then, like you said, you go back and you listen to it and through maybe somebody else's lenses or ears, and then if you can really kind of distance yourself, then you start thinking, all right, that's kind of actually clever. That's an interesting way. It's just a different way. And my kids get on to me sometimes because even with more modern pop songs, I can't stand it if I'm stuck in the car and I don't have control of the music selection. And then I'll hear somebody like Postmodern Jukebox, or I think there's a group called Walk Off the Earth out of Canada.
Mm.
They'll do their covers, but they'll do it in a different way where you can actually hear the words and the lyrics, and it's kind of like, oh, I actually do like that song. I just didn't like that person's version of the song, the original.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, and I think that that's the thing that if I go back and I look at some of the lyrics and stuff from the Bee Gees and their earlier work, it's actually not too bad in some respects. And then there's even been songs that I've heard afterwards that they did that had 1 or 2 little hits that came out. Um, but that they're not in my top 3, 4 groups of that I'd go listen to. But I have a more of an appreciation for what they they accomplished and what they brought to the table than I did probably say 20 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. We come to track 10.
Yeah.
Now this one, still a lady theme. Have to flag this. But
Yeah.
this is a great song. Three
Yeah.
Times a Lady by the Commodores.
Yeah. So what's the reason I remember this one is that when our Uncle Keith got married, I think it was 78, I was asked to stand in the wedding, and I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. So I was a groomsman at a very young age. I felt sorry for the young lady that at the teenager I had to walk down the aisle because she was at least maybe a foot and a half taller than me. But the reception was at you remember the balcony?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think I've
Okay,
been to a
so
wedding at the balcony.
yeah. So the balcony, for those who aren't familiar, is a reception hall. I think it's still around in out off of Airline Highway
Mhm.
in New Orleans, or outside New Orleans, and it is basically a big venue, which just they did catering. You had the wedding, you had a bandstand, and then you had an upstairs balcony where the bridal party would usually hang out and come down and greet. And so I think Keith got Keith had a reception there. There may have been some before him that we didn't get to attend because either we were too young or we weren't in town. Jean's first wedding was there, and I think actually Keith's daughter Laura had her reception there too in the 90s. But I remember this very uh, wedding singer type band in the late 70s of white guys singing this song because they had, that I think most of the music must have been a lot more, I don't know, funky or rhythm and blues. And then they tuned it down to this. And I don't know why it stood out to me, but then I heard it on the radio from the Commodores, I guess when we were back in Dallas or Houston after that. And I was like, oh, that's a song from Keith's reception. And
Who's this
and
band
what's
doing it now?
yeah, yeah, exactly. These guys got too much talent compared to the ones in but what was kind of interesting is that of all the groups that we've mentioned or artists, this is actually the only group that I've seen in person was the Commodores. Although, be it was after Lionel Richie had left,
Okay.
they Mobile had some outdoor called Bayfest from like '95 to 2012. It was downtown, and they set up stages, kind of like an attempt at a jazz fest. It was 3 days, and they had different headliners. And so the first year I went, that's the year before Astor and I were dating. It was like Little Richard played, and uh, Bobby Blue Bland.
Hmm.
I think Village People were there, but I wanted to see Little Richard versus Village People. But I remember the Commodores. There was the three one, and the Commodores are actually an Alabama group. They from Tuskegee, about 3 hours north of Mobile. So I didn't realize all that, but there's one original member, and instead of having I think six, they were down to maybe three at that point,
Okay.
and they performed. They did a really great uh, show, and so much so that I actually bought a CD of the Commodores that I had never had before, and of course it had most of all the work from Lionel Richie. Um, but yeah, I thought that was I also read that he was actually writing the song for hoping to sell it to Frank Sinatra versus them perform it themselves.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Lionel Richie was.
yeah, because I don't think he took it. I don't think he took it to be a Commodores type song, but they were looking for something different. So I guess he said, "Well, I was going to try to sell this one to or pitch it to Frank Sinatra." Um, which I heard Kenny Rogers sing a version of it and Conway Twitty, and they. I know I don't put Sinatra in that same realm as that, but uh, he might have been
This
able to
song,
pull it
right?
off.
This the
Yeah,
same Three Times a Lady. Okay.
yeah. I don't think Conway's version. I like a few songs from Conway, but I didn't really like the way it started out, and then even Kenny, I think, kind of to me, maybe it seemed like it was just so alien. It didn't seem like it was a good match for him.
Mhm.
But anyway, Lionel Richie and the Commodores, to me, it's the classic version of it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's
these are all good.
No, no, just it's an incredible song. I think some of the early Commodore stuff and obviously the stuff Lionel Richie wrote. I think they were back on Motown in the early days as well.
Yeah,
You could
yeah,
hear some of their stuff was pretty cool.
yeah. And and to that point, I think, I think about Motown. I'm thinking of the Temptations and the Four Seasons and Diana Ross and the Supremes.
Supremes.
That era of music, which, like I said, those songs, those also kind of they overlap with a lot of early New Orleans rhythm and blues, which I get, which was another part of the soundtrack at the house on Metairie Road. I mean, like I
Hmm.
said, there's a lot of, we've talked about, you've got the rhythm and blues, we had the rock stages, we had the British rock, we had the I guess the East Coast music of Billy Joel, had some country whining songs. I mean, it was all, from it was probably pretty typical, but at the same time, with 12 kids, or say 8 of them living there at the time, maybe, and the influx of music in New Orleans and the different stations, it would seem kind of odd, like that, like you were talking about Cajun music over and being popular in England, but to think of groups like the Who or ELO in a southern city, even though they're kind of a big phenomena at that time. But just I think, like I said, it's just that there's a lot of musical influence that you could hear, and we're not even touching on things that were, probably be preferred to be remembered. Gigi probably prefer different songs and artists versus some of the ones I came up with. Um, and Craig might have as well. But like I said, it's just to kind of give a glimpse of those type of things that that I kind of remembered back at that time.
And David, thanks for sharing these songs in your background stories on these. But you made a comment about being into genealogy. I think this is something that um, you obviously are a bit of a sleuth when it comes to that as well. And I think this episode is actually a little bit special in a lot of ways, not just because of
Mhm.
you sharing this background, but it's also it's insights for me personally.
Mhm.
And do you want to share kind of like how you and I got more connected in an official way, besides just being cousins, or first cousins for that matter?
Sure. I mean, I can tell the story from how I was approached. Uh,
But give
on
the
there
background
were
about how you're very good at finding people, doing research. You keep mentioning research about all the stuff, but maybe the CIA needs to look into hiring you for some research in people, because obviously beyond recipes and this and that history, you obviously are pretty good at research in people.
well, I appreciate that. I've had an interest in genealogy probably almost around the same time that all this music came up. Uh, what was interesting is that I'd always hear my grandparents talk about growing up in the country, which was the German coast. Um, but then I'd always ask the question. It was more out of the standpoint of, are we related to anybody famous? Are we royalty or anything like that? Because I don't know if every kid does that or not. But for whatever reason, in the '70s, and maybe because after Queen Elizabeth had her 25th Jubilee or whatever that was. But there's a lot of those kind of things. I guess maybe it's all part of the discovery of who you are and who your family is.
Mhm.
But I got interested into it, and a lot of support was over the years because grandparents, it's like, oh, you need to talk to so and so, or there was actually things in the Times-Picayune newspaper in New Orleans you could write to. So I had a lot of people who gave me a lot of information on our pedigree charts and maybe good or bad, the small Catholic or the big Catholic communities along the river parishes in Louisiana, they
Mhm.
kept good records, but there's also a lot of intermarrying. So it also became, there wasn't a whole lot of branching to, I mean, it's not like a straight line, but it was pretty easy to gather a lot of the information. Um, and so I got interested in genealogy and collecting things. And then uh, what you could find out is that when you start building databases and you start seeing names pop up, it's like, oh, shoot, mom and dad are related to each other. Oh, crap. What does that mean about me? And then, so then that kind of got on the back burner for a while till I went through college, and then I got married. And then my oldest daughter, Nicole, was born in 2002. And that kind of reignited my interest in genealogy. But also at that time, tools had really developed with the internet and a lot of digital tools. So
Hmm.
now, uh, things that I had learned as far as like the things that had been given to me, you could see, okay, this is references. I also had gotten my master's in chemical engineering, so I also learned to do a little more researching. And now all of a sudden, I could find, okay, I can find connections through this reference, through these newspapers, through these articles, and I have sort of a knack apparently for making connections and drawing upon things that sometimes my kids and wife they like don't say it, don't talk to that person about that because it's going to be embarrassing to say, oh, I happen to notice that you and I have the same ancestor, you know, and and why are you looking up my ancestry? But anyway, so that I guess is kind of that ends up kind of giving the rest of the family has spread the word that I've got some sort of talent and with that, and then because of my interest in genealogy. So then fast forward to I guess 2022, I
Yeah.
guess it was 3 years ago. Uh, Growing up in Houston, we didn't have a whole lot of family there except for my uncle Brian and his kids, Jenny and Stacy, and his wife at the time, Mary Ellen. We moved there; they were living there. And then and then Kevin and Brenda ended up moving there with their kids, Greg and Chris later. And then we moved to Mobile. So that gave me the unique opportunity because Brian and Mary Ellen had divorced, but he would take Jenny and Stacy and they'd come stay at our house every couple of weekends. So we got to develop a bond with them closer than some of the other cousins because, that was the family we had there. And then Brian uh, also took me to he was a salesman a lot of times. So had some games, the Astros games where he, had entertained clients. So he took me to some Astros games where he had some kids the client had a kid. And then, was learning to drive and he had this smaller car and my dad had a station wagon. And, I failed the driving test with the station wagon. My dad had to take that job in New York. So Brian, hey, I'll teach you you can practice in my car. So thanks to Brian, I passed my driving test on the second try, which kind of comes back to actually yesterday. My daughter passed her second try yesterday with her driving test. Um, so there's a bond with Brian and Jenny and Stacy. So fast forward 2022. Obviously, we're not in contact like we are, but thanks to Facebook, we've reconnected and stay in touch. And then Brian's second wife, Camille, also happens to be distantly related. So we've all kind of get together. And Jenny or Stacy sends me a text. Are you home? I have a question for you. And I was driving home from work, and I was like, I'll be home in about 30 minutes. Can we call you? And I was like, damn, call me. They haven't called me in a while. Uh, I'm thinking maybe I don't know if they want a recipe because we had talked about some of the stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, they call me and they say, "Hey, we got a question for you." I took an ancestry dot not I think it was Ancestry. No, 23andMe. Took a
And
23andMe
ancestry.com.
test and Ancestry.com, and we got a hit. I said, "Okay," and it shows we've got a brother. I was like, "Hmm." And so I said, well, I'm going to tell you something. I said, I had heard some stories, but I also saw this hit come up with and it wasn't a descriptive, I can't exactly remember the description. I mean, I put my name down there, but it was some letters and some numbers. And I said, I remember about 2 years ago, I had one, and then I haven't been able to find it, but it said first cousin. And I was trying to figure out who it was. So we started talking. And they said, well, we think we might have a brother out there. So I was like, well, I'd heard some stories, but so also another cousin, Ashley, had asked me about the connection. So we said, all right, well, let's see what we can do. So we started looking, and they had heard some stories from Camille and Mary Ellen, and we realized that there's a son out there, there's a brother out there, but we didn't know really what his name was or where he was. So finally, somebody came up and they said, I think Sean. And so we started looking at Sean Robert, Sean Robert, and I started looking at pictures of all these different people on Facebook or LinkedIn. And so I take a picture, send Jenny, Stacy, what do you think? I don't know. So finally, we settled on an individual who we thought was a high high probability. And so I sent. Oh, what was interesting is that on Facebook, I also had a connection, a common connection with this individual. There's a
Mhm.
woman that I met through Meliton in Mobile, who came from New Orleans, and she was connected to this guy. So I reached out to her. I said, "Hey, you know this guy Sean? Is he this age? And what about his parents?" And she didn't tell me a whole lot, but thankfully, I guess because of the fact that there was a connection with her, the profile showed up. So I took these pictures, and at that point, I think it was Stacy sent a LinkedIn request, and I sent in a Facebook message. And
Yeah.
simultaneously, I'm at work one day. We start getting a message. It's like, I just got an email from this guy, and I said, oh, I just got a response back on Facebook at the same time. And lo and behold, we found you. And
So
so,
just to give you a little bit of background on I think I did the test in 2016. I uh, Around that time, maybe 2015, 2016. It was a work colleague who told me about it and said, if you're looking for, because I didn't know anything about on my father's side,
yeah,
kind of just to know ancestry, just to see what kind of where possibly came from and stuff like that. Um, Interestingly, I think a few years before that, I was in Istanbul and at a conference working and stuff, and people came up to me, locals, and started talking to me in Turkish, and I was like, I don't know what you're saying. And they're like, "Oh, I thought you thought you were Turkish." So I was like, "Okay." So that was also what kind of prompted me thinking, "Okay, where do I look like? Where do I come from?" Did it
mhm,
then. I honestly remember getting spam mail from them occasionally saying you got a match, you have this DNA match and all this stuff, not really paying
yeah,
too much attention to it, and kind of just putting it aside and not really paying attention. I did tell the sisters recently that I found an old message from Ashley before Stacy had contacted me, and this was maybe 21 or
yeah,
20. She contacted me and says, "How are we related?" And I didn't
yeah. I
see the
think.
message because I wasn't checking this thing very regularly at all, to be honest.
Mhm.
So I think by finding me on LinkedIn and Facebook was probably a sure bet. But in your digging, you also found like pictures of me from high school yearbooks,
Yeah,
which is really that's some deep
yeah.
operative kind of sleuthing, because
Well,
I don't even have a copy of those pictures anymore because I think the yearbooks got destroyed in
yeah.
Katrina or something. My grandmother might have had them or something, but that's how you found those. I have no.
Well, a lot of credit goes to the fact of being willing to pay for certain subscriptions on Ancestry.com. They have a lot of, they don't have every, but they got a lot of yearbook digitized pages. So there's certain, so that's kind of the method. I forgot about that aspect of it too. So when, finding the pictures of you on Facebook, and they were a few years younger than at the time, I think they'd been up there for a while. And I'd look at them and talking to my mom, and I was like, and I'd look at certain, see your pictures, and I'm like, I kind of see cousin Andrew there. I kind of see cousin Greg there. And then, it just depends on what when I look at you now, I see aspects of Brian as we're talking. Um, but, with the one or two pictures that depended on how your facial expressions were. So I said,
Mhm.
well, let's see if I can find some pictures of them, because what we're trying to do is tie in the timeline, because this was all prior to Brian and Mary Ellen getting married. You were born, I think, a couple of years. Um, and so found some high, well, there was either the S or Sean, and like I said, it was either Robert or Roberts, and it was going back and forth. And
Yeah.
so with the year with the ancestry and just knowing it was some area of New Orleans is basically you kind of cast a wide net and then okay, this would have been about the right time frame that we're looking at. And so then when they pull those pictures up and then start trying to compare them, squint and say, well, if he aged and lost the little hair, it probably that could be him. But then they also kind of said, well, he looks like so and so here in the family. So that kind of gave us a little bit more, it's got to be this guy because it looks like, the family there, we have a strong family resemblance. I know you haven't met a lot of the family members, but, and with you being overseas and such, and even me going to Mobile, living in Mobile, I don't get back and see everybody as much because of the 12 and their kids, which is 20 plus grandkids. Everybody's kind of spread out now. But like I said, being able to, and I kind of feel like that's also maybe part of my, not duty, but as kind of doing the genealogy and the connections. I think a lot of what I do with the Rainy Cajun or my Melitons or genealogy is to try to connect, bring back reconnections between, those folks from South Louisiana or looking for family. Because when I did the DNA test the first time, it matched up with all the stuff I had on paper with the genealogy. But what I did not expect was when I'd have one or two distant cousins come up to me and say, how are you related to such and such Wagasback? I said, well, this is who I am, or this is who I have got as my ancestor. And then they would say, well, I never knew my grandfather. I never knew my dad, and or I was adopted, and I'm just trying to connect. And I was like, oh shit, I didn't think about that aspect of being able to help because I know for so long with a lot of places in genealogy, there's a lot of things that get hidden on purpose for whatever reason, and so at the same time, the the other thing is that too is that when you learn about somebody, especially you, Sean, it's like, man, this guy's a great guy. We need to get him. We need to get connected with him, and there's that other aspect of just trying to like I said, Jenny and Stacy, and Jenny, and I mean Stacy has her own stories about how she even had the vibes to reach out and look.
It was
But yeah,
borderline
you should use
stalker, but yeah.
yeah. Well, I get accused of that from my daughters too with the you know th- there's I got a certain set of skills that that I can employ. But yeah, some of it becomes second nature for that type of thing. And there's probably a little OCD where once I kind of get interested in something, trying to dig deep and try to make those connections and see. And like I said, I'm glad we were able to to do so. And like I said, hopefully, like our conversation today and others, try to give you some also context into the background
Yeah,
of your ancestors and relatives. you know. But like I said, you're
it's
still
definitely great.
yeah, you're still the best find that I've come across in all the success stories of finding links or roadblocks, or as they call it, or walls, I think is what they call it.
Yeah. And I mean, I technically was just hiding in clear sight. So it wasn't, to be fair, that complicated. But, I remember just the LinkedIn messages from my sister Stacy and just kind of like, I think we're, and asking me all these questions. And then it kind of got a little bit more. And I was kind of like, I think you got it wrong. I don't know. And I said similar to you on Facebook, I don't know. And I was thinking this whole, again, which shows my complete naivety of not really getting the whole ancestry.com and what I did, by doing this. I just assumed I was going to get some. Maybe you have a little bit of, Greek, you have a little bit Italian, you have German, French. Not really putting together there people out there that I'm going to be directly linked with. So this has been extremely life-changing for me, and I think with most of like especially Stacy and Jen, and some of the family. But it was incredible, but still sometimes I still think about it like it's so strange, like this is,
Yeah.
did I dream that, but you were a part of this whole find, and a big part of it. So it's, I have you to thank for opening up
You're welcome.
Pandora's box, in a way, which has been, and the family who I have met have been incredible. They've been
Yeah.
very welcoming and friendly, and just nice to meet them and talk to them. And as you know, cousin Jared was on recently,
Yeah.
and I got to meet him in person in New Orleans and had lunch with
Yeah.
him. So it's been nice to have this complete
Hmm.
kind of life changing kind of experience. Not something, still, it's still surreal, but
Yeah.
but the relationship with Stacy and Jen in particular, and solely, has been amazing.
Hmm.
Now they're interested to hear what's this episode for sure.
Well, I know that, because I mean, y'all have been able to connect, at least 3 or 4 times since finding, I mean, in person,
Yeah.
because you your trips back to the States, and then they went over there to France to visit. So I know it's been, y'all have been able to, and that you can never make up for all the lost time, obviously, but at the same time, um, it's great that y'all have been able to act in a quick manner. And to add to the story, one of the women who I'm connected to on the internet, about a year or two prior, she had reached out to me and asked if I would do that ancestry test, and I was like, yeah, but I did 23andMe. I said I could do ancestry, but I mean it was like, I don't know, $60 or something, and I just didn't want to spend that much on more than one test. Didn't realize whether or not it would benefit me a lot more.
You're on the
She goes,
ancestry
well,
because we're connected on that, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's ancestry, but
Yeah.
what? Yeah, but so she gave me the test, and I was like, you're gonna give it to me? And she goes, well, I bought 3 or 4 extra sets or tests, and what happened is in her case, uh, her mother had told her that her father had died when she was young. Well, come to find out, when her mother was on her deathbed, her mother told him, "No, your father and I divorced or separated, or he left us." And he was alive until like 5 years earlier, and so she never had that opportunity to connect. Well, then she also found out she had 2 or 3 siblings, and she met up. I don't know if she actually got to visit, but she's in her 70s or 80s at this point when she's telling me all this. Um, but she found one in the brother, and I think before she could meet him, he passed away. I mean, this is like within a month
Oh,
of
wow.
her finding him. So that it kind of resonated with me a lot too. That standpoint, that especially hitting as close to a I say first generation, but first cousin level, and like I said, the background with growing up with Jenny and Stacy, and kind of hearing some things about being around Brian, and enjoying the visits with him, and like I said, the things that he helped when I was a kid. It's kind of like there was no um, hesitation from that standpoint. It's like, yeah, we need to connect. If you're willing to connect, and I think that's all they really wanted to do. If they could connect, and if you were receptive, I think that was the thing. And if I think if there was no reception there, it would probably still answer some questions, but at the same time, I think that it's become more enriching especially for y'all, because of the fact that the y'all's personalities and your interest, and y'all just like I said, maybe if you lived next door to each other, y'all might get on each other's nerves, but at the same time, the to find things, and like you said, I think you've even mentioned, there's certain characteristics or things that you either see with them, or you learn about Brian, that maybe they answer questions for you that, oh, okay, well, uh, okay, that comes from this side of the family, type of thing.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's I certainly, and I know the last couple of years I hadn't been able to talk to you as much with some other things I had going on, but I always want to help you to connect and us learn as much as we can to share the histories and the customs and things that we weren't always everybody able to be together for certain celebrations and stuff, but if there's certain foods you liked or certain recipes or certain musics in this case, you can make a connection and say, "Oh, okay, yeah, that was something that they might have listened to, or that might have been something they liked to watch, or, and maybe kind of give you a little more insight." And like I said, any of the pictures that I come across, like the ones I sent you to kind of give you some context of the house and things in the 70s, those are the kind of things I hope to do and be able to give to you so that, you have any follow-up questions with any of that, just let me know.
Yeah, I know. I love that, and thank you so much for that, and I appreciate it. And like I said, it's special to have you share this and to continue to kind of be that. You're almost like a Wikipedia as well, just for for the family, but also around just that piece of New Orleans and Metairie that is I want to make sure I keep and cherish, because traveling and moving around and kind of left New Orleans at such a young age, there's things that I remember and as growing up there, but it's still a special,
Hmm.
and it always will be home to me.
Yeah.
So I do see us doing something around New Orleans together on music, and I think that could be a segue to our part 2 of this podcast.
Yeah.
But it'll be a music one for New Orleans at some point. So,
Yeah.
but David, thank you again for sharing this and bringing bringing your songs, but also so much else that for us, and as my cousin, it's
Yeah.
really special for me. So I wish
Yeah.
you the
You're
best,
welcome.
and
Thank you.
always be kind, be humble, be loved. But thank you again for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome, Sean. I enjoyed it. Happy to do it.
Thank you. Pretty vacant times.
Are you ready?
It suffers for his sports jacket.